Well, who are you, listener person? I just noticed that you came along to listen to the show. What a delightful surprise! I don't know much about you. I'm Mischke. I just wanted to say I'm aware that you're there, and given that fact, I'll really try hard to do something that keeps you engaged and interested, and we'll have ourselves a time here, we will. I like to tell people that on my show, I offer everything from soup to nuts. Soup to nuts. Well, we're gearing up to get started here. I better make sure I have my thoughts in order. Hang on. There they are. Oh, I love podcasting. That's what I do. I'm a podcaster. Well, this is the last week that we'll only have a Friday show coming out. After this, we will have Wednesday and Friday shows. Beginning next week, Wednesday there will be a podcast, and Friday there will be a podcast. That's 2 a week. That's where I'm finally going to draw the line. 2 podcasts a week, that's plenty for this old man. I remember when I wasn't an old man. Years and years and years and years ago, many years ago, quite a while ago, God, that was a long time ago, I was a little boy, and on Saturdays, I used to watch bowling on television. Men's professional bowling. I didn't have a life like so many other kids did. My parents had me in a straitjacket much of the time. Anyway, I remember back then being well aware that these fellas I saw bowling, these professional bowlers, they were not like baseball players. They were not like football players or guys in the NBA. These were athletes in a kind of dork category. I knew that even then. Now, before you get on me about this, I want to tell you, I too bowled back then. I bowled as well. The local bowling alley had these ridiculously low rates in the summer because there were no leagues, and whole families could get a cheap bowling membership. I mean dirt cheap. And I would bowl with my neighbor and my brother. Bowling was wonderful on a rainy day. I still remember all the creepy guys who hung out at the bowling alley. I remember them like it was yesterday. I can still see their faces. This bowling alley was in a basement-level bowling alley next to a kind of sleazy lower-level bar. So the smell of alcohol always mixed with the smell of shoe sanitizer. And guys hanging out around there were the type of guys who rolled their Marlboros into their shirt sleeves. And they all looked as if their greatest achievement in life was going to be nothing more than getting that high score in pinball. But there were a lot of us kids around, too, and we watched these adults, and we learned from them. Adults never really know when kids are watching them, when they're learning from them. They really don't see it happening most of the time. It's quite subtle. The whole thing happens in a kind of clandestine way. But we were trying to figure out the growing up game best we could. I was modeling myself on some pretty goofy characters back then. And you can see the results of that. You can find photos of me as a 12-year-old at the wheel of my dad's LTD with smokes I stole from my brothers. And though I'm not actually driving the car, and frankly not even smoking the cigs, I am pretending to do both. And I'm feeling very, very grown up. Clearly, I was being influenced by the wrong people. Here's the thing, though. I did not model myself on the fellas I saw bowling on television Saturday afternoons. I always knew something was wrong there. There was much that I took in that didn't feel right. The failure of this to be a team sport was obvious to me. These guys were all up in their own heads. They were alone, completely alone. It did not have the Well, it didn't have the social feel of most sports. They didn't interact with anyone. They seemed obsessive as well. And I thought to myself as I watched them, these guys spend hours each day rolling a ball, endlessly rolling a ball, then getting the ball back and rolling it, probably practicing from sunup to sundown. And then they get in front of a crowd and they show all of us what this concentration has produced. And the crowd, when I'd watch these professional bowlers on television, the crowd gathered there. They actually seemed to be gathered in what looked a lot like that same sleazy basement bowling alley that I frequented. The feeling was that this crowd wasn't terribly cool either. That they watched bowling and maybe went home and told their spouses to fix them a Rob Roy or a Harvey Wallbanger, and then they just sat in front of the television the rest of the day. The big thing to do if they did have some free time and some disposable income was to go watch the PBA in person. And there they'd be, sitting there in shirts just as bad as the shirts the PBA guys were wearing, with the same bad mustaches the PBA guys had. I don't know, everything just seemed a bit off when I would watch bowling on Saturdays as a kid. I knew the bowlers were pros, real pros, but they didn't seem to be the kind of pro athletes that had groupies waiting for them afterward. My sense was there most likely was just a fat guy with a cigar waiting, wanting to know if they ever went to Vegas. But here's the crazy thing. I actually was watching professional bowlers at the peak of that sport. I mean, at the height of the fame of that sport. The absolute peak, when they were making more money than professional football players. When they did, in fact, as I have learned since, when they did, in fact, have groupies. See, I've been reading a lot about pro bowlers in the 1970s. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe I'm trying to connect with that part of my childhood. But the 70s, man, that was the heyday for pro bowling in America. Those guys were on top of the world. They had to know it couldn't last, but they were on top of the world for a while. I hope they realized it couldn't last. I mean, you just look at the sport. It had two major flaws, seriously major flaws. Flaw number one, the action never changed, ever. A guy with a ball took a couple of steps and rolled the ball. That's all that ever happened. You cannot have a big-time sport with zero variety in the action. Why didn't they ever add a feature where another guy tried to get the ball away from the guy holding it, tried to stop him from rolling it down the lane? Why wouldn't they add that part? Then it would have been more like football, more like basketball, where you'd have a defense. Where the hell was the defense in bowling? Did you guys not even think about that, ever? There's defense in tetherball, for God's sake, in tetherball. Problem number two, there was a finite high score. 300 was the best you could do. Getting all the pins down with every throw, you could get a 300, but you couldn't get higher than that. You cannot have a sport with a finite line like that, a point where you've done the best anyone can do and no one can do better. That puts us in mountain climbing country, doesn't it? Who cares if anyone climbs Mount Everest anymore? Does anyone care? There are long lines at the top of Mount Everest now, long lines of climbers waiting to say, been there, done that. They're strolling up to the peak by the hundreds every day. Made it, next, made it, next. It means nothing now, and if Mount Everest means nothing, then all the other mountains mean nothing. Mountain climbing is over as a great sport, as a sport that can truly capture the imagination. It's like bowling's 300 game. Let's move on to something new. We've hit the highest height. Bowling was doomed. The fellas had to know it. Those hotshot PBA bowlers riding high, they had to know it was never going to last. But again, back then, word is, this is what I'm learning, they had a couple of gals waiting after their match. Maybe near the men's room when they had to head back there. Maybe the girls were smoking cigs out by their cars or something. I don't know. But I've been told these guys had groupies. And they had to look at that and say, this isn't going to last either. None of this is going to last. And these days, it is a sad, sad story. What I've been reading fills me with profound grief. I've been reading all about pro bowlers of late. It's depressing. You know who's waiting out by their cars now? Repo men. Repo men. I'm not kidding. Listen to this sentence. I read this just today. Once upon a time, professional bowlers were sports royalty. Groupies pawed them after tournaments. Casinos blanketed them with free show tickets. Their TV ratings trumped baseball and professional golf. Says Carmen Salvino, a bowling icon of the 60s and 70s, we were like rock stars. Well, today the glamour has completely faded. Motel 6 is the Professional Bowlers Association's official lodging partner. Their tournaments are sponsored by Denny's. Carpooling their way across the country, bowlers typically sleep 2 or 3 to a room in discount hotels that they find on Priceline.com. You're always trying to spend the least amount possible, says Sean Rash, professional bowler. In the 60s and 70s, they made twice as much money as NFL players. They signed million-dollar contracts. They were heralded as international celebrities. After each match, they'd be flanked by beautiful women who'd see them bowl on television or had read about them in Sports Illustrated. But today, pro bowlers supplement their careers with second jobs like delivering sod or working at a call center. Once sexy, bowling is now synonymous with cheap beer and smelly feet. Ouch. Wow. That's tough to swallow. That's a hell of a fall. Makes me just want to go back to my childhood for a moment and escape this horror show, however briefly, and once again bathe in the wonderful world of bowling that was the 60s and 70s. This is what bowlers today refer to as the good old days. Play it, Wally.
In a typical city or town, on a typical residential street, we find a typical home occupied by a typical American family. Like millions of his fellow Americans, John Q. Public earns enough money to keep up the payments on a new car. He takes great pride in owning a fine, new, long-term mortgaged home that was built to last a lifetime. Mrs. John Q. Public no longer finds housework fatiguing drudgery, thanks to a host of labor-saving devices. Mr. John Q., because of a 40-hour week, has the leisure to dream about his favorite sport.
Can't depend on those things, as the magic triangle pindicator shows you there, and the automatic pin spotter setting it back. The second ball is necessary. Now, George Young really has it salted if he can keep going the way he is. For Pete's sake, what happened to that 7-pin? My gosh, that looked like a good hit, didn't it? And that's going to cut down what could have been a brilliant game there.
So you've had a little run-in with the universe. Came upon a rogue stop sign, and the other fella considered stop to be more of a suggestion than an actual requirement. Or maybe it was the lawnmower that you had a little confrontation with. A rogue lawnmower that turned on you like an angry girlfriend. Whatever it was, defective product, car accident, you don't have to take it lying down. Unless, of course, you're actually not able to get up. Bradshaw and Bryant are the ones you want on your team. They've been helping people like you get what you deserve when life throws a wrench at you for years. They'll get you the compensation you deserve fast and easy, and you won't pay a dime unless they do. So if you've been body slammed by fate, if you've been tackled by bad luck, if you've had a run-in with Satan, you call Bradshaw and Bryant. They'll fight for you, and if they don't win, you don't pay them. Learn more at minnesotapersonalinjury.com. Picture this. You're gliding through your neighborhood, the breeze in your face, and the freedom. But the best part? It's effortless, because you're on an e-bike from EcoFun Motorsports. You get the thrill of riding without breaking a sweat, unless you want to break a sweat. Yeah, you can still get in some exercise if you want to, or let the bike's pedal assist feature do the heavy lifting for you. EcoFun Motorsports will let you try out their e-bikes, and they're having a sale right now on e-bikes. You can start riding right now at one heck of a great price. Whether you're using it for fun or for commuting or just getting out for a little exercise so you don't feel too guilty, an e-bike makes it all possible. Go to EcoFun Motorsports and try one out while they're on sale. EcoFun Motorsports. Ride farther, feel better. Visit them today in Forest Lake or Burnsville and find the perfect e-bike for you.
Where are you bowling this summer? Hi, I'm your old Uncle Merle, and when I go bowling, I like to go where there's pleasant surroundings and happy people. And to me, that means University Lanes, the complete recreation centers where you find the finest in bowling conditions. Go where the happy people are. Let's go bowling.
That's my childhood right there. Scintillating. I got a little carried away researching bowling. Did you know bowling originated in Germany in 300 A.D. as a religious ritual in which participants would roll stones to absolve their sins? Wow! Bowling started as a cleansing ritual. Dirty, soiled, unclean souls would bowl in order to be freed of their sins. I should have said that to the young guys at the bowling alley when I was a kid. I should have said to those fellas with the cigs playing pinball with their greasy hair, "Fellas, come to the lane, take a ball and roll it, and free yourselves of the weight of your sordid existence." I'll tell you what's weird about bowling's early days. It was constantly being banned. Apparently, the sport was so popular in England, by 1336, King Edward III had to ban it to keep his troops focused on their archery practice. And then, years later, King Henry VIII would ban bowling again. Why? Because bowling had infatuated the working class so much that they were neglecting their trades and impeding the financial progress of their nation. Then move all the way to the 19th century. Knickerbockers, New York City. First modern indoor bowling alley, built in 1840. 1 year later, bowling is again banned. Banned due to gambling and racketeering. But they made a mistake in that law when they banned it. They banned 9-pin bowling, which is what bowling was and had been for a long time. 9 pins. The law said no more 9-pin bowling. Well, what did they do? They just added a 10th pin, and they circumvented the law, and bowling continued merrily on, and we have 10 pins to this day because of it. With that whole working man image and vibe, bowling became a billion-dollar industry by the end of World War II. I still have my old man's bowling ball from the late 40s after he came home from the military. He was in a league in a small town in central Minnesota, and his team was sponsored by Hamm's. Hamm's beer. I think his first date with my mom, he took her bowling. He knew how to show a gal a good time. "Jan, can I get you a cold beer to go with that hand towel and your bowling shoes?" "Sure, Maury. You're sweeping me off my feet now, you old dog." From the 1940s to the 1970s, bowling just exploded. It saw its golden age. The sports professionals were its unbridled kingpins. I mean, those were the halcyon days. A 1963 article in Sports Illustrated harped on the glamorous explosion of the bowling scene. The glamorous explosion. Harry Smith, who was the top pro bowler in 1963, he made more money than Major League Baseball MVP Sandy Koufax and NFL MVP Y.A. Tittle combined. Harry Smith enjoyed a life of copious luxury. In '64, bowling legend Don Carter was the first athlete in any sport, to receive a $1 million endorsement deal. That'd be about $8 million today. Did the fellas know to enjoy it while it lasted, because it wasn't going to last? If you are a top 20 bowler in the world, a top 20 bowler, your annual income could be as low as $27,000. The average income for the remaining 250 pro competitors on the list of pro bowlers is only $6,500 a year. $6,500 for some of the best bowlers on planet Earth. Tom Hess was named Pro Bowler of the Year. He's a delivery driver when he's not busy bowling. He's had 13 perfect games. I mean, he's a hell of a bowler. But his average earnings each year, $24,000. He says mastery doesn't come with a big paycheck. Mastery doesn't come with a big paycheck. I wonder in how many different endeavors in this world a similar statement could be applied. Mastery does not come with a big paycheck. He says for a lot of guys, being a pro bowler doesn't mean that your whole income is derived from bowling. But it still is the case that becoming really good takes a lot of practice. He says he bowls 6 hours a day every day. He says if you're a pro bowler, you have to put in those hours. And there's little payoff, he says. Nevertheless, I bet the groupies are still there, huh? They're just probably a little different. Just different, huh? Different would maybe be the kindest way to put it. I imagine Carol and Renee standing there still, little too much makeup, little too skimpy on the outfit maybe, quite a few years behind them. They got the smokes going. Carol has a personality disorder, and Renee is, well, what they used to call a slow learner. They both work as checkout clerks at the nearby Hy-Vee. But boy, do they love bowlers. Always have. They are passionate about bowlers. They say there's nothing like heavy-set guys with clothes from the wrong era who are willing to take them out to Perkins and who offered a treat for dessert, not the meal, can't do that, but for the dessert. So the gals stock up on cheesecake, and the fellas have to keep cleaning out the change from their car's ashtrays. That's life today if you're a pro bowler. Part of the day you're delivering for Grubhub, part of the day you're practicing or meeting Carol and Renee for thrills, usually in the back of Renee's '72 Dodge van. Sometimes as a pro bowler, you maybe meet another pro athlete, an NBA player. Maybe you try to have a conversation, but no, it never goes well. You try to claim you're both pros, but the NBA guy is always hurrying past you, trying to get into his limo, trying to get by you. You want a camaraderie, you want a solidarity, you want a shared sense of your professional skills, your sporting prowess, that you share these gifts in your own unique ways. But then you remember you deliver for Grubhub. Now, some bowlers dream of bowling making a big comeback. My sense is, if bowling is to make a big comeback, there will need to be defense added. Come on! Someone should be in your face when you're trying to bowl, trying to knock the ball out of your hands. Would anyone ever bowl a 300 game with a defender present? I say no. And once you remove the 300 game, the game can once again seem challenging. In the meantime, say hi to a PBA player if you see one out there. He might be washing your car or giving you a tag at the coat check. Tell him there's a nobility in going down with a sinking ship. There is a nobility in disappearing into that abyss. Remember, Mastery doesn't necessarily come with a big paycheck, but it is mastery just the same. Okay, when we come back, Dave Hage has been a friend of mine for many years. He's a veteran journalist, years and years as an editor at the Star Tribune. He's also an accomplished author. And I watched him over the last few years work on a book with another Star Tribune veteran, a veteran journalist named Josephine Marcotty. And what were they looking at so intently? Something you and I would look at and not really know what there was to say about it, really. They were looking at the prairie. That part of America you can find in parts of Minnesota, Iowa, North and South Dakota, eastern Montana, Nebraska, Missouri, parts of Colorado. The prairie, people, the thing we don't think about. They decided to think about it, think hard about it. And the result is a wonderful book called, appropriately, Sea of Grass. And it's fascinating. Stick around. Dave Hage and Josephine Marcotty after this. American Pressure is not your go-to place for a little home-use pressure washer. It's for those on the job who need a beast, a pressure-washing beast, something that doesn't just clean, it obliterates. For decades now, American Pressure has been the one helping businesses keep their industrial-grade machines clean, their fleets clean, their facilities spotless with pressure washers. You need a part for your pressure washer? American Pressure stocks thousands. You need service on site? Their service vehicles roll up like the cavalry. Need an entirely new pressure washer? Let American Pressure assess your needs and come up with the perfect tool for making your headaches go away for good. They'll hook you up with something that'll make your competition jealous. American Pressure has been around since pressure washers went from kinda cool to Lord, that's powerful. American Pressure has your back. Find them at AmericanPressure.com. Okay, let's talk about your eyes, and let's talk about an eyewear shop with real vision. Whether you've got a prescription so complicated it could be a NASA math equation, or you're just looking to turn heads with some vintage frames that scream, "I'm cooler than you are," Spectacle Shop has you covered. 4 locations in the Twin Cities: Uptown Minneapolis, Grand Avenue in St. Paul, St. Louis Park, New Brighton. They're where you need them to be. Spectacle Shop. It's not just about looking good, gang. They've got the best optometrists around, ready to make sure your eyes are in tip-top shape, no matter how tricky that prescription may be. And when it comes to crafting precision lenses, they're considered the best at what they do, even by the competition. So if you need glasses that make a statement, or you just want to actually see clearly, head over to Spectacle Shop. The eyewear is stylish, the prescriptions are perfect, and the vibe? Well, it's as cool as you're going to look. Spectacle Shop. Dave Hage and Josephine Marcotty are my guests. The book they have written is a wonderful book called Sea of Grass, The Conquest, Ruin, and Redemption of Nature on the American Prairie. Welcome, both of you. Delighted to have you with me.
We're happy to be here.
Nice to meet you, Tommy.
This book was one that I took in so many different directions because it went in so many different directions. It was a history book for me. It was a science book for me. It was a human interest story book for me. It was where I learned about farming, where I learned about the place where I grew up, a place I thought I knew a lot about, but I really learned I knew nothing about it, at least not in terms of the land itself. Sea of Grass is a delightful title, and it speaks to what people saw when they first encountered the prairie years and years ago. When Europeans encountered the prairie, never having seen anything like it, they saw it as a sea, as an extraordinary other world. It wasn't beautiful. It was scary.
All those open spaces. It was kind of terrifying. All that wind and all that crazy weather and no people around that they could see and no trees. I mean, they just weren't used to it.
Europeans had never seen such a big open space with no trees, just grass. And many of the early ones who arrived on the frontier, they assumed that this landscape was infertile, that you couldn't grow anything there because there were no trees. And it took quite a lot of trial and error before they discovered that that rich black prairie soil was unbelievably fertile and perfect for growing their crops.
The vast majority of it, particularly as you got farther west, was just grass. In the east, it was tallgrass prairie because there's more water. And then as you move west, the grass got shorter and shorter and the trees got fewer and fewer.
The long grass to the east has all but vanished in this country. There is an ability, almost like a museum piece, to go see some of it, to get a feel for what it would have been like to come across the long grass prairie. Where can one do that?
Prairie remnants, they call them. There's one in northwest Indiana. There's one south of Chicago, I think. There's a prairie restoration that we write about in the book in northwest Minnesota called Glacial Ridge. And that's the largest prairie restoration in the United States where they brought back tallgrass prairie.
So you could go there and you could stand there and you could feel what it was like for a European moving west to encounter the tallgrass prairie.
Yeah, that's right, Tommy. And the original tallgrass prairie, which would be states now like Illinois, Iowa, parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin, the grass grew so high that those early explorers and settlers, they had to stand on the backs of their horses to see over the grass and see where they were going. Josephine and I visited a partly restored prairie in Iowa, not too far east of Des Moines, the Neil Smith Prairie Preserve. It's beautiful. But I tell you what, there's reed grass and cone flowers that literally towered over our heads. If they didn't have little trails, you could get lost in that tall grass in Iowa.
There's only 1% of the tallgrass prairie left, and that's all in tiny remnants. One of the reasons why we were interested in writing this book is because to tell people, that they have forgotten what we've lost. In other words, we haven't experienced a tallgrass prairie before, so we don't know what we had.
We're down to 1% of what was originally there. What percent of the shortgrass prairie can be taken in this country?
Shortgrass prairie would be out west, western Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, and about 40% of the original shortgrass prairie still exists because in the 19th century, farmers didn't go there. They thought it was too dry, too cold, too horrible, the climate. You couldn't grow wheat or corn out there. So they raised cattle. And so we still have thousands of acres of grassland out in those northern Great Plains states.
So that's what you see if you drive through the Dakotas. You just see that endless expanse of grass and sky. That's the shortgrass prairie.
I want to read from your book. When Europeans arrived on the plains in the 16th century, they found a landscape unlike any they had ever seen before, vast, terrifying, swarming with insects, and baffling in its monotony. The Spanish conquistador Francisco Vázquez de Coronado, arriving on the southern plains in 1541, reported that his troops got lost constantly because there were no trees or hills to serve as landmarks. Even finding the trail of his army presented a challenge. The dense grass so quickly closed over its tracks. When they moved through, they didn't even knock it down enough for it to stay there.
Yeah.
Coronado would send out scouting parties because they were so confused. They were trying to find, the lost city of gold. The Spanish thought they were going to find all this gold treasure in the quote unquote New World. He would send out scouting parties of like 5 or 6 soldiers, and they'd never be seen again. They just disappear into the grass, and they could never find their way back. They adopted a practice of the native people there, which is that they would shoot an arrow in the direction they wanted to go, and then when they found the arrow, they would erect a cairn of rocks or animal dung or something like that, and then shoot another arrow, go to that one, and put some sort of a little landmark. And that way they could tell where they were going.
The Indian tribes down there, as a way of defending their country, would lead the soldiers out of the middle of nowhere and then just abandon them. and see if they could find their way back, leave them in the wilderness.
And when you get to the shortgrass prairie, my sense is now you're looking at something more akin to a kind of desert. They see sky, they see endless land, but it's no longer getting lost.
Yeah, if you look at 19th century or 18th century maps, these early efforts at making a map of North America, you'll see right in the middle, right about where Kansas and Oklahoma and Nebraska and Wyoming would be, they'll just write the American desert. They just called it a desert. There are all kinds of reports going back to presidents back on the East Coast or royalty back in Europe saying, don't bother. Nobody could ever live here. This is impossible. There's no water. There's no wood. It's not suitable for any kind of civilized society to ever settle here.
I want to pass along another passage from your book. This is the introduction. I just loved this as a way to dive into the book. The book is Sea of Grass, The Conquest, Ruin, and Redemption of Nature on the American Prairie. Dave Hage and Josephine Marcotty are my guests. Heading into northeastern Montana on U.S. Route 191, you could easily think you've entered a barren land. You can drive for miles without seeing a house or a barn, a cow or a dog. Just grass and sage, rolling away in gentle swells under the giant sky in a landscape so empty it's almost spooky. But pull off the road, step into the grass, and you find yourself in a landscape teeming with life. Delicate white butterflies flutter along the grass tops. Crickets crouch beneath a canopy of stems. A tiny vole, shaggy and brown, scurries across the ground. The tanned carpet is dotted with flecks of yellow and white, where yarrow and prairie aster reach toward the sun. Here and there a prickly pear cactus pokes through. The silence is stunning until you really listen. The wind sighs over the grass, and a bobolink hurls its song into the air. Take another step. A startled pheasant bursts from a thicket and flaps away noisily. This is delightful writing, and it just brings alive this part of the world. You write here, this is the paradox of the prairie, feared by pioneers, shunned by tourists, dismissed today as a wasteland, best viewed from 30,000 feet. But the North American prairie is one of the richest ecosystems on planet Earth. 220 varieties of butterfly, 1,600 species of grass and flowers, 1 billion grassland birds, a roster of creatures synonymous with America's untamed West. One of the joys of reading your book is the building sensation of the prairie just coming to life. This idea of comparing it to the Amazon rainforest in terms of all that's going on, all the life there, this supposed American desert. It's the first thing that happens to me when I read your book is it changes everything in terms of my view out the window of this world I grew up in.
Thank you, Tommy. That's what we intended. One of the things we really wanted to do was to introduce people to this landscape that they just didn't know, never considered, that is still something of enormous value that they should know.
Josephine and I talked a lot about how to make people understand the richness, the complexity of this ecosystem. Everybody's talking about the rainforest. We need to save the rainforest. And we do. I'm not making light of that. Josephine coined this phrase, this is our rainforest. Scientists are starting to say the same thing. There have been incredible breakthroughs in the science of soil biology. They now understand that prairie soil is a living thing. It's not just the dirt under our feet. It's a living ecosystem. It's full of bacteria and fungi and mites and nematodes because it's rich. It's full of carbon. It's full of nitrogen. Those grasses process carbon out of carbon dioxide out of the air. They process nitrogen. And so there's this rich community of tiny little critters under the soil feeding on that carbon, processing the nitrogen. It's a little ecosystem. And somebody told us it's so rich. If you took 1 tablespoon of prairie soil, the organisms in a tablespoon of soil are more than the human population on Earth. It's a living thing.
An area the size of Connecticut is disappearing every 3.5 years. with little notice, these grasslands are vanishing faster than the Amazon rainforest. A, how are they vanishing that fast? And B, why should people care about that?
They're vanishing because farmers have started moving west in the last 2 decades or so. As Josephine noted, around 1900, the plows pretty well stopped moving west at the 98th meridian, about eastern Kansas, because they just thought that the land west of there wasn't enough rain for crops. The winters were long, the growing season was short. And so that was grassland west of there for the last century, roughly. But about a decade or two ago, the big seed and agrochemical corporations started presenting these amazing new seed hybrids and seed varieties and new fertilizers and herbicides, so that you have like short season corn and drought tolerant corn. So all of a sudden it was possible to plant corn and soybeans in places like western South Dakota, where you could never make a crop grow. Western Kansas, they're plowing there again now. In addition, you have a pretty generous federal safety net, farm subsidies, crop insurance, so that even if you get a drought and your crop comes up short, you've got crop insurance from the federal government. So all of a sudden, those lands in the western Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, that were too harsh a century or 50 years ago are now places where it's profitable to grow corn and soybeans. And in fact, it's more profitable, largely because of federal subsidies, it's more profitable to grow corn and soybeans than it is to raise cattle or do anything else with the land. We talked to somebody who said, South Dakota, take an acre of grassland where people have been raising cattle for 100 years. We talked to these terrific ranchers. Take an acre of somebody's ranch, kill all the grass with Roundup, plow it up, and you just doubled the value of that acre of grass. And so a lot of ranchers, they look at that and say, wow, I'm getting out, I'm cashing in.
What's happening in the West now with the short grass prairie is the same thing that happened 150 years ago with the tall grass prairie. It's about the advance of technology across the grasslands. It started with the John Deere plow, which was the steel plow. Before that, they couldn't plow the prairie because the soil was too sticky and it stuck to their iron plowshares. But the steel plow allowed them to cut the grass. Then there was fertilizer. I mean, the invention of fertilizer completely revolutionized not just the United States, but allowed the earth to almost double the population it can hold simply because we could grow more food with it. And so now you have an extension of that same technological advances in the form of genetic engineering with seeds, genetic engineering with pesticides, herbicides, and other chemicals, which allow them to farm in places where you could never farm before.
What is the great harm when we've lost the tall grass prairie and the short grass prairie?
If you look at what happened where we plowed up the tall grass prairie, Illinois, Iowa, southern Minnesota, there are counties in southern Minnesota where there's nowhere that's safe for kids to swim because the streams and lakes are so full of farm fertilizers. The Environmental Protection Agency has said that agriculture is now the leading source of pollution in the nation's rivers and streams. So that's what happened when we plowed up the tall grass prairie, turned it over to intensive chemical-based agriculture. Now, we haven't done that yet west of the 98th meridian. We're losing it. So what do we lose out there? Well, that short grass prairie out there, it's a huge buffer against flooding. Grasses and wetlands have that really spongy soil. It holds water in a heavy rainfall. Since we started plowing up those lands, flooding on the Mississippi River and the Missouri River have gotten much worse. Devastating floods, killed people, billions of dollars of damage. There are now many communities across the Great Plains where the water isn't safe to drink anymore. It's full of nitrate.
Is there an automatic connection between turning a prairie into a farm and it being detrimental, or was it just the way farming went? Because we obviously needed the farming as well.
It's mostly the way. If we had more diversity in crops, if we grew more oats, and if we used cover crops in the winter, which is very, very difficult for farmers to do because it's expensive and they can't make money on it. But one of the reasons why we have such problems with water pollution and nitrogen is that for 9 months or 6 months of the year, soil is bare. And nature, you never find bare soil in nature. There's always something growing on it. So if they were able to use cover crops more often,
40% of our corn crop goes into ethanol. It's not feeding people, it's going into people's gas tanks. The book is critical of agriculture the way we do it, big industrial scale agriculture driven by the giant corporations. We're not critical of farmers. We met wonderful farmers and ranchers, generous people, good people, hardworking, lovely. They welcomed us onto their land and showed us around. But they're stuck in a system that they didn't create. They have to buy all of their inputs from a handful of giant multinational corporations that sell them seed and fertilizer. They only have a handful of customers, that little cute country co-op grain elevator that you used to see down the road all the time. Those are gone. Now farmers are selling almost all of their grain to giant corporations, Cargill, ADM, and they have to grow what the big corporations want them to grow. There's a great group in Iowa, Practical Farmers of Iowa. They're wonderful people, all these conservation practices. We ran into farmers. They want to grow oats. They want to grow barley. They want to grow alfalfa and peas and a variety of crops. And there's no market. They can't sell them. Nature doesn't like simplicity, and that's what we have. We have a corn soybean monoculture. We've turned the land into a kind of factory for corn and soybeans. Nature doesn't like that. Nature likes complexity and diversity. And there's all kinds of research now that shows that when you have a more diverse crop rotation, even adding a little bit of alfalfa, a little bit of oats, a little bit of barley into your corn soybean rotation, the soil is richer, you don't need as much fertilizer, there's less erosion, there's less water pollution. And this is the way everybody farmed 50, 60 years ago.
Stick around. Sea of Grass. Dave Hage and Josephine Marcotty after this. I get it. You want your money to grow, but you don't want it doing cartwheels without a safety net. I understand. So does Josh Arnold. 40 years of experience meets a refreshingly down-to-earth approach to investing with Josh Arnold. Josh Arnold isn't some nerdy, humorless financial advisor with a stiff suit and a $1,000 tie. No, sir. He's actually been helping people like you figure out your financial future for decades. Whether you're saving for retirement, planning for the next big life move, or just trying to stop your money from disappearing like your phone charger, Josh Arnold has a way to make you happy and your investments healthy. He's offering 48 minutes to you for free, a consultation you should not pass up. Call him, 952-925-5608. Rewind, listen again, tell him where you heard about him.
Investment services offered by Josh Arnold Investment Consultant, LLC, a security and investment advisor. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All investments involve risk. Tommy Mischke is a paid endorser.
When it comes to caring for a loved one with memory challenges, they really deserve a place that feels like home. So welcome to the Welshire of Bloomington and Medina. They offer 4 distinct households, each tailored to different stages of memory care, and memory care is all they focus on there, so they end up being the best at it. From early to late stage, their expert team provides personalized attention in a secure and really beautifully appointed environment. Residents at the Welshire enjoy spacious suites, inviting common areas, thoughtfully designed courtyards. At the Welshire, they believe in living with pride and dignity. You ought to schedule a tour today and discover a place where your loved one will truly thrive. The Welshire of Bloomington and Medina. If things keep going the way they're going, if the shortgrass prairie gets eaten up by these farms that are now able to jump into this system of this power growing, allowing them to work land that wouldn't have been possible to work before, and you see the shortgrass prairie slowly disappear the way the longgrass prairie did, what do you envision?
Flooding will get worse and worse on the big rivers, the Mississippi, the Missouri, with less grassland to absorb and hold rain. Cultivated land, the water runs off much faster in a big storm, goes right into the river. So flooding has already gotten worse on those rivers, billions of dollars of damage. That's going to get worse. more and more communities are going to have to pay a lot of money to have clean drinking water. The city of Des Moines a few years ago had to spend $4 million on a special nitrate removal system, machinery that could take, because the Raccoon River, which is their source of drinking water in Des Moines, was so full of nitrate coming off the farmland that it was unsafe to drink. And there are dozens of other communities across the plains that's got that same problem, only they're smaller than Des Moines. They don't have $4 million to clean up their water, install this expensive technology. So clean water is going to get more scarce. Pollinators are already in a bit of a death spiral. We depend on them to pollinate our food. Most of the things we eat, they rely on natural pollinators. And if we lose the pollinators, then all that stuff is going to get way more expensive when you buy it at the grocery store.
You've heard about the decline of honeybees, right?
Yeah.
They're really sort of a canary in the coal mine for insects in general. They are now become sort of migrant workers themselves because farmers bring them in to pollinate food crops because there aren't enough native insects left to do it. Without insects, natural ecosystem declines. They're the base of the food chain. Since I've been in high school, we've had a 40 or 50% decline in grassland birds, but they also depend on insects. Without enough insects to eat, they don't survive either.
Two of the groups that are doing some of the greatest work on prairie preservation are Pheasants Forever and Ducks Unlimited. They're hunters, right? They want to hunt pheasants and ducks. They love the wildlife. They love the grasslands where that wildlife lives. It's great to get out there and walk through the fields and do some hunting. But they recognize that if you don't protect this grassland ecosystem, you're not going to have ducks. You're not going to have pheasants. So preserving it is important.
There's a part of your book that fascinated me. It was on the subject of bugs. E.O. Wilson, the pioneering evolutionary biologist, pointed out that if humans disappeared, the insect world would carry on and even thrive without us. Humans, however, could not survive without them. Though insects may be one of the least appreciated and most invisible forms of life on Earth, they form the structural and functional base of all living systems. They drive most plant reproduction through pollination. Without them, you write, humans wouldn't last long because the crops we eat would crash. The thing you learn in this book or are reminded of, and I think we always have to be reminded of this, is the way nature is set up so much as just a bunch of dominoes. And pretty soon, the things you love, the selfish thing you're interested in, being able to swim without being poisoned, being able to drink a glass of water without having to worry about getting sick, all of a sudden, well, now I care. It reminds me of this notion I've had all my life that everybody is an environmentalist because the second you get up in the morning, you need to take a breath. Second you grab a glass of water, you're hoping you don't get poisoned. So we're all environmentalists. It's just that everybody has different standards. And what happens in reading your book is you realize it's eventually hitting everybody's standard, every single person's standard.
As you say, it's dominoes and they start collapsing pretty quickly in ways that we don't even understand yet. You know, there's a very complicated world and we're only just beginning to understand the consequences of what we do out there. Josephine heard an amazing story from a bison rancher, a buddy of ours out in South Dakota. A farmer came to visit him from eastern South Dakota, was walking around these beautiful pastures, and he heard a meadowlark. It's a beautiful, beautiful whistling song of a meadowlark. And he started crying because he said, I haven't heard a meadowlark since I was a little boy. They're gone from the eastern Dakotas, and I was one of the people responsible for their extinction out there. People miss that stuff.
Yeah, there's another terrifying passage in your book, Sea of Grass. The Mississippi is described as this tiny, clear stream, and then you follow that tiny, clear stream as it moves south. And after a while, you come upon the Mississippi as a brown, muddy, mile-wide body of water carrying tons of nitrogen and phosphorus from all the farms across the basin, and it finally flows into the Gulf, carrying so many nutrients. The water gets obliterated of any sea life across thousands of square miles. I don't know how many people know about this along the Gulf Coast. Robs the water of its oxygen, and it becomes this dead zone. Nothing can live there. And this is what our river produces when it hits the Gulf. How did we get to a point where lakes are so polluted, kids can't swim in them, drinking water is threatened, and the Gulf of Mexico has this giant dead zone? How did we get there without someone saying, whoa, 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 let's slow this down. We got to stop some of these practices.
Some of that would come with changes in federal policy that would pay farmers and pay landowners to do the right thing and to do the things that are kinder to our systems than what they do now, which is essentially to incentivize farmers to do and landowners to do the things that are harmful.
I think that's really important. So one thing I learned, one of the many things I learned from your book, is that farmers' hands are tied right now in this country. They are victims of a system that will reward them for harming the environment. It'll reward them for that. And if they attempt to not do that, it will punish them. What the hell?
Ethanol was introduced to us some years ago as a green fuel, as a good environmental alternative to petroleum. What does ethanol do? It increases the demand for corn. So if you're a farmer here in Minnesota or the Dakotas or Kansas, and you think, I'm guaranteed $4 a bushel for my corn, why wouldn't they grow corn? Why wouldn't they plow up more land? Why wouldn't they use more chemicals to increase their yield? We've given farmers the wrong set of incentives.
People who grow livestock don't have the same kind of insurance protections that people who grow commodity crops have. So people who grow commodities, they get crop insurance that we, the taxpayer, pay for mostly. Whereas someone who raises cattle, they don't have the same thing. So raising cattle is a much riskier proposition for them. Whereas if we were to make that playing field more level and give more equal protections to people who grow different kinds of things, including livestock like bison or cattle or sheep, then farmers would be able to raise food on grass, and that would protect the grasslands. I mean, that's just one example.
There's a great group called Practical Farmers of Iowa. These are farmers. These are not some liberal inner city environmental. These are farmers talking to other farmers, promoting practices like cover crops, diverse rotations, low till. And what they show each other is that you can save money. You can adopt these conservation practices. Not only are you cleaning up the water and protecting your soil, but you don't need as much fertilizer. Some of these farmers pay $100,000 a year for nitrogen, for ammonia, for fertilizer. You can cut your nitrogen bill in half with these practices. So there are really great farmers out there adopting these cool practices. They want to do things differently. Some of the big food companies, Unilever, they own Hellmann's mayonnaise, so they use a lot of soybean oil. PepsiCo, they use a lot of corn sweetener. They have programs working through Practical Farmers of Iowa where they will cover your risk. Let's say you cut your use of fertilizer. It's called a yield insurance. If you do some certain conservation practice and the next that your yield goes down, they give you a subsidy to cover your loss of yield because they're trying to change these practices. There are a handful, pretty good food companies that are underwriting the experiment of farmers so that they don't lose the farm.
Dave Hage and Josephine Marcotty, we've talked for a significant amount of time, and we haven't scratched the surface of this book. I said earlier, and I'll say it again, I don't know anybody who isn't an environmentalist when it comes right down to it. I have a place on a river in Wisconsin, and I really would like to be able to drink that well water that I pump out of the ground, and I can't. And I'd really like to swim in that river and know it's clean, and I know it isn't. And I know why it isn't. And there's a certain point at which it gets to be, I'm sure people have gotten to that point in Beijing, just breathing the air. There's a certain point at which the diminishing returns are such that everybody in mass should be able to say, we got to do it differently.
Yeah, we hope.
Sea of Grass, The Conquest, Ruin, and Redemption of Nature on the American Prairie. Thank you for your good work on this, you guys.
Thank you, Tommy. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for your interest in the book.
A real pleasure.
And that is going to do it for this show. Next week, 2 shows will come out, and every week thereafter. Next week, Wednesday, will feature a podcast as well as the usual Friday episode. You will get more of me in the coming weeks, whether you like it or not. I do this for a living, folks, and I dropped another job to go full steam into this world, working for Hubbard and doing nothing else. It will probably be my living until I retire and hang up the microphone finally for good, whenever that'll be. We'll see how 2 podcasts a week are received, see how it all goes, but the advertisers are there already, all lined up, so full steam ahead. I will talk to you next week, twice. Thanks for listening. Until next time, so long.